I did a photo shoot. It was good, but it was also a little bit terrifying, nerve-wracking. It's a little bit like when you go to a theme park with your friend and your friend really wants to go on like the biggest, scariest, most G-force intense roller coaster and you're like, no, thank you. But then they convince you to go on it anyways and it ends up being super fun, but also terrifying. It was kind of like that, which may seem a little bit over dramatic, but I'm so used to just working alone with myself and a tripod and a camera and a remote, and there's no pressure. If I don't get the shot in like the first 50 tries, like it doesn't matter, I'm only wasting my own time. But when I'm like working with a photographer, it's really a little bit intimidating because it's like, I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know if I'm like sticking out my tongue a little bit, because fun fact, when I'm concentrating really hard, I tend to just like stick out my tongue just a teeny tiny bit. It's like when cats do that little blip thing. I do that and it doesn't look great in photos. And I don't realize I'm doing it until I'm like looking through the photos and I'm like, oh, I'm sticking out my tongue in like 30% of these. So it's a mixed bag, but in the end, I'm really happy that I did it. I think I spent less than $25 on the entire costume, which is not an insignificant amount of money, but it is cheaper than 75% of the fairy costumes you can find online. The most expensive part was definitely the hardware and the chain, and I went for the cheapest chain I could find, which ended up not being a great idea because it broke the day of the shoot and I had to like safety pin the chain links back together where they broke, which was really frustrating because I spent like $11 on this big roll of chain and it ended up being super flimsy, and that was the most expensive part. The other part that I spent more than I thought that I would on is the dye. I didn't anticipate how much dye it takes to dye that volume of fabric. I ended up buying 2 boxes of dye and 2 bottles of dye, which maybe, I think, made up pretty much the rest of my budget aside from like $3.99, which I spent on spray paint. I also wanted to talk about some of the mistakes I made while making this costume. One of the most annoying mistakes that I made was actually these butterfly hair clips. I secured them to little clippies so that I would have the versatility to wear them on their own if I wanted to, but on the day of the shoot, these clips were not strong enough to hold them in my hair in the place that I wanted them to be, and they kept on falling out, and it would have been much more efficient and way easier to manage to just glue them to the sides of the headdress and they wouldn't have been falling out. And that actually led to a really big disappointment when I saw the shots, because I noticed I was in the woods, so I didn't really have access to a full-length mirror and really to see what I was doing. So because these kept falling out, I kept clipping them back in, and I must have clipped them in upside down. So there's this one photo that's beautiful. There's a beautiful river and a beautiful tree, and there's me, and everything looks okay until you look at my head and you see that the butterflies are upside down. And I don't know that other people would notice it that much, but it just drives me crazy and it completely ruins the shot in my mind, even though that's a little bit over dramatic. I'm like, why are they upside down? Why didn't I notice? I'm so disappointed. One challenge with this photo shoot is I kind of hyped myself up with unrealistic expectations. I struggle with body image, as many people do, many women especially. And for some reason, I had convinced myself that if I do this shoot, all of my body image issues will just vanish and it will just be better. And that's unrealistic and also untrue. But one thing that did come out of it is I could see myself from another person's perspective, literally through someone else's eyes, and see that the way that I see myself isn't always the way that I actually am. That said, I can only look at a photo for like a very short amount of time before I start picking it apart and just looking at the flaws, and that's still something that I need to work on and really try and overcome, but there's no instantaneous fix. It's a long, drawn-out process of learning to be more accepting of your own body and your own face and just the way you look. I should have really written a script because I'm not good at talking to a camera. Bless you! Oh, don't fall, don't fall, don't fall. There we go. I can sit without falling over sometimes.